Please lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. Birds sing out a tune and rain clouds hide the moon. I'm okay, here I'll stay with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. So I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when. When she does, I'll know. So baby, until then, lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. So I wait, and in a while I will see my true love smile. She may come, I know not when. When she does, I'll know. So baby, until then, lock me away and don't allow the day here inside where I hide with my loneliness. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love. I don't care what they say, I won't stay in a world without love.
All right, that was Peter and Gordon with World Without Love. And my name's Caswell Cooke, and welcome to the Caswell Cooke Show, or as we've been calling it since COVID-19 has happened, and we're doing everything this way through our phones and through our computers. We're calling it Caswell Tonight. And we've had a great group of guests that have been on the show the last few weeks, and tonight is no exception. Tonight's an honor for me. And for those of you who are watching on the Peter and Gordon page and wherever you may be watching tonight, welcome to the Caswell Cooke Show. And thank you. Please subscribe to our channel, The Caswell Cooke Show, on Facebook and YouTube. But I want to get right into it because he's live from sunny California. I'd like to bring on my guest for this evening, Mr. Peter Asher.
Hi, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Well, that was a great video of World Without Love. So what do you, when you look at those old videos now, what goes through your mind?
I think that's the one, unless I'm wrong. I think that's the one where you tactfully removed the Jimmy Savile introduction. I might be wrong, but I think that's the one where the whole movie, it's a movie of essentially clips, but I think it's the one that was hosted and emceed by Jimmy Savile, who, as you probably know, turned out to be an arch villain and an utterly revolting child molesting pig, but got away with it. I mean, he died before it all got exposed. But then I think they took away his knighthood and all this kind of stuff. So to be honest, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I think this is the one that the ghastly Jimmy Savile introduced us on. But I remember making that video. The set was really strange. Those strange kind of weird metal sculptures that we had to walk around. I couldn't quite see the point. But that was the era when you did what you were told.
And of course, the invisible organ.
That's right. Yes, exactly. No, the whole band wasn't particularly visible, but yes.
So when you were doing those shows, was it live, or did you have to lip sync to any of those, or were some
that
shows?
Was totally lip sync. Yeah. Totally lip sync. The other thing that comes to mind is that was my original 12-string guitar, Gibson 12-string that got stolen out of the back of our station wagon somewhere on the road, which I missed. Though I did have another one made 10 or 15 years ago. My new one, which was made for me 20 years ago, which Gibson did a beautiful job, but I do miss that old one. It was a cool guitar. I'd like to have both. If anyone's got it, It's still around somewhere. The one thing you can be sure about is no one, unless somebody burnt it for firewood, that guitar in that clip is still around somewhere, and it is still stolen, and I will still kill the person if I ever find it.
So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about.
See, I told you what the danger is with me. One question, and I'll fill the first hour. But carry on.
Well, I wanted to ask you about the book, The Beatles from A to Z, and
Yes.
I wanted you to tell us about this book. We have it.
You mean this book?
Yeah, that we even have it on the screen. See, we were ready for
Oh,
you.
you do. See, so now it's on both screens. Yes, that's the book.
Well, tell us about it.
Well, it's it's a function of the radio show, as you probably know. I do this radio show on Sirius XM. I always try to think of new ways to come up with shows because I've done 160 of them now, which, as you know, in our business, 160 hours of me burbling on is unthinkably horrible and boring. So I have to keep thinking of ways to not make it too boring. And so I had this idea of doing Beatles from A to Z, not just song titles, but people, places, events, musical styles, instruments, everything. And so I did that to give me 28 shows and 26 shows, whatever. And it wasn't my idea to turn it into a book. It was the book people's idea. These publishers, Henry Holt, which is a very old and distinguished, fancy publisher, kept asking me to lunch, and I kept saying no, thank you, because I thought it was going to be an offer to do an autobiography, which is what I get all the time, and I've declined. And they said, no, we don't want an autobiography. We think the Beatles from A to Z, the shows you already did on the radio, would make a great book. And I went, well, that sounds pretty easy, because I probably can just take everything I've said on the radio and get it transcribed, and there you go. But of course, it turned out not to be that at all, because you look at what you said on the radio, and it's nowhere near finished, ready for a book, because you don't talk the same way when you're writing. Plus, the fact that on the radio you can play a song, you can talk about a song and then you play it. In the book, you talk about it and then you have to talk about it some more because they're not on the radio. And so it eventually dawned on me that I had inadvertently committed to writing a book properly from beginning to end, and that's what I did. I enjoyed doing it.
I was listening to your show today. I guess it's the replay today on Sirius XM.
Yeah.
And you do keep it interesting, because you were talking about you played the George Martin produced, was it March of the Meanies, which I'm like, nobody plays that. So you really do dig deep. I mean, it's a lot. It's not a cursory view of the Beatles. It's deep.
I do. And then people think that means I know everything. I get these people going, can you tell me which bass did Paul play on this song or whatever? I don't know anything. I certainly don't remember anything. So I look it up like everybody else, but I do have the additional good fortune to be able to integrate it with some actual recollections of when I was there, or when I talked to one of the Beatles about X and Y and things like that. So but what I'm not is the kind of, the sort of nerdy expert who knows, there are people who literally know, what about the outtake that they did, 2 takes later, where the bass part is different in these 2 notes, and did Paul play a different guitar, or, it's like, I don't know, I wasn't there for, that much. And if I was there, I probably wouldn't remember. And more importantly, neither would they.
Right, exactly.
Because a lot of these Beatle nerds that think, if only I could just ask, Ringo which sticks he used on which song or something. He wouldn't know,
Right.
Anyone that would. But there are people who figure that stuff out, I'm amazed and impressed by. Don't get me wrong. I'm very impressed by that stuff. And there are, as you know, these books that have figured out which instruments each Beatle played on which songs and which takes got used, and the people who now they put out a lot of the outtakes and stuff, and there are people who've really figured all that stuff out, and it impresses the hell out of me.
Let's go back in time to when Peter and Gordon first came out. First of all, and I was very happy to have had the pleasure to know Gordon in his later years when he moved close to us. I'm in Westerly, Rhode Island, and he moved to Ledyard, Connecticut.
Yeah, he was a very cool guy.
He was a great guy. He'd call up and say, "Kaz, let's go to the steak loft for dinner," and we would have a lot of fun.
What he meant was drinks and dinner.
Drinks and dinner. Yeah, absolutely. So tell us how you and Gordon Waller met. How did that become Peter and Gordon?
Well, those are two entirely separate questions. How did we meet? Number one. Number two, how did we become Peter and Gordon? And I use the term advisedly because we met at school. We figured out we both saw each other with guitar cases and stuff, and we started talking based on the fact that we realized we both played the guitar. And I think Gordon was a better player than me at that point. He knew a couple of chords I didn't know. Neither of us were virtuosos at all. But Gordon used to play a bit of lead guitar. I didn't. And so that's how we met. And we started singing together and playing together just because. And I think if we'd met a couple other people at the same time, maybe we would become a band like everybody else. But we're a duo, and we sang together. And surprisingly, considering that our voices are very different, and most duos have voices that are ever so slightly similar. I mean, even the Everly Brothers, you can tell Don from Phil, but it's not night and day. Whereas with Gordon and me, excuse me one second, it's completely night and day. I mean, I've got this sort of thin, sort of white choir boyish voice, and Gordon had this big baritone, Elvis-y, manly voice, and you wouldn't have expected they would blend, but they did. So that's how we became Gordon and Peter, because that's what we were called at first. We were Gordon and Peter at school. We were Gordon and Peter when we started doing gigs, and we were playing coffee houses and bars and anywhere we could get, and a lot of school functions and birthday parties and whatever. And then the real answer to your second question, how did you become Peter and Gordon, is that when we got a record deal, EMI thought Peter and Gordon sounded better, and so they turned the name around. So you
didn't disagree with that, right?
I have no. I mean, they probably know better. Who was I to complain? But so we were Peter and Gordon. So that's why they are quite separate questions. How did we begin, and how did we become Peter and Gordon?
And then, of course, you tell the stories, but it's so fascinating for people, like me, who, I mean, I wasn't even alive back then. I missed it. I was too late. But to be able to hear the stories. So tell us about, how you come to have Paul McCartney writing some songs that become huge hits for you. I mean, how does that happen? I
think everyone's heard the story, but I'll tell you the not incredibly long version. Jane, my sister, was at that time and still is a very well-known actress and celebrity in England, and more so than in America necessarily, and highly regarded, and also respected for her opinions on music. She loved music. We're all a very musical family. Both our parents were very musical and so on. So she was invited as a guest celebrity reviewer to go and see the Beatles at their first London concert. And that's how she and Paul met. They started going out together. And that led to him hanging around our house a lot of the time. So I met him then, liked him. We became friendly. And eventually our parents sort of took pity on Paul because he was at our house a great deal at the time, around for dinner and meals and whatever. And my mom was doing his laundry and, whatever. And so eventually he ended up moving into the guest room on the top floor of our house next to my bedroom. So we lived next door to each other on the top floor of that house in Wimpole Street for 2 years. So that's how we became friends. And I heard a number of songs during that time, some of them freshly written, some of them existing songs. And Well Without Love was an unfinished song. Paul explained to me that he'd sort of abandoned it because John didn't think much of it, or at least didn't think it was right for the Beatles. And so it was, as I say, an unfinished song that I liked. And then when we got a record deal and we were looking for songs, I went back to Paul and asked if that song was still unclaimed, and it was. So I asked him if we could do it, and he said yes.
So how long did Peter and Gordon last as a duo? I know it wasn't that long in the scheme of things. No,
but if you think about it, neither with the Beatles. I mean, things seemed to move rapidly then. If you think about it, I mean, the biggest example is Buddy Holly. I mean, the entire career was like 18 months or something. It's like, I think it's something as crazy as that. And he wrote this body of work that is one of the most influential group of songs in early rock and roll history. And the Beatles' career was, I don't know, what was it? 5,
Well,
6.
yeah, 6 years of recordings.
Yeah, exactly. So, and gigs, 6 years old, and so, and Peter and Gordon, I don't know. I mean, we started at school in 62, perhaps. I don't know. We made our first record in 64, and by 68, I was producing James Taylor's record at Apple. So that's kind of that's the time frame.
So let's talk about that. So tell us so here's my cool James Taylor story. So
Okay.
the night that James got
I'll be the judge of that.
You be the judge. So the night that James Taylor got inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in 2000, I got a press pass. Right. So I'm in the press room and I'm like, I need to get in that room when McCartney does the induction ceremony. So I went into the bathroom and I snuck into the room. And I got up to the door and the security guard looked at me and I'm like, listen, that's Paul McCartney and James Taylor. Give me 3 minutes and I'm out of your hair. So I got to stand on the side of the stage and watch James become a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Oh,
Is that a cool story?
Of course. It is cool. Yeah. I was a mere mortal. I was sitting at James's table out in the front, cheering him on. You're the man. No question.
Oh, well, I snuck in. You're the man. So tell us, how did you discover him?
It's true. I did have an actual invitation. I was there legitimately.
Yes, you were.
Well, I think again, it's a documented story, but the key figure is Danny Kortchmar. One of my favorite and James's favorite guitar players. Still is, and a great friend. I got an email from him this morning, and Cooke had been in a band called the King Bees, who backed Peter and Gordon on several American tours. We became great friends and stayed friends after Peter and Gordon stopped touring. Cooke and I would exchange phone calls and letters, not emails, and antique letters. And from time to time, and I would stay with him actually when I was visiting California at that point in time. And then Cooke was subsequently in this band, the Flying Machine, with James, and when that band broke up, they were all in New York. The band broke up. They were, had no money and bad management and a creepy record label, and everything was going wrong. And James was strung out and all kinds of bad stuff. So James decided to go to London. Cooke said, "Oh, I have a friend in London, Peter Asher. He's okay. Give him a call and tell him you're my friend." And that's what happened. He called me up pretty much out of the blue. I had actually apparently met him once before at a Flying Machine rehearsal in New York, but I don't remember that at all. But I think it's true. I did meet him in New York. But he called me up, came over to the flat, invited him to dinner the following night. He came over, sat down, played me some songs. I went crazy and said, "This is brilliant stuff. There's this strange coincidence. I've just got a new job. I'm head of A&R for a brand new record label. I can sign people. Would you like a record deal?" And he said, "Yes, please. That would be very nice." And so I said, "Well, here's whose label it is, and you'd better come and meet them." And he came over a couple of days later, and I rustled up Paul and George, as I recall, to listen to him, and they agreed with me, and I signed him.
That's an amazing story, and the rest is history.
And then when we left Apple, of course, after making one album, and that was a whole other big story. Why did Apple fall apart? Why did the Beatles break up? That's volume 7.
Right.
But when that all was happening, that's when James and I both decided to leave Apple, and I bet my career on his, decided to become his manager, and basically sold up as best I could. I had no money at that point, and none of us were making money back at that era, and moved to America. And just basically walked into Los Angeles. I knew people, at least, because we'd been there on the road. So I knew some people and could, put something together. But basically saying, I managed this guy who's brilliant, who's a genius, and off we go. And I've managed him. I managed him for about 25 years, I think.
Amazing. And then, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. That's it.
And then I was going to say, so now, tell me about, well, first of all, I saw a few years back when Carole King and James Taylor were at the Troubadour, they gave a big shout out to you, and you were up in the sound booth, as I recall.
Yeah, because I produced the album from that. James asked me for help putting it together. As much as we could, we did the original set list that we did back in the day. I wish I could have found an actual written set list. That would have been cool. But we figured it out because, again, this is a bit of a digression because it's a little bit complicated, but that gig was essentially when Sweet Baby James was out and had become a big hit. So I invited the musicians who played on Sweet Baby James, which had included Carol, of course, and Russ Kunkel, not Lee Sklar, oddly enough, though he did play at the Troubadour, but we hadn't found him in time to play on the record. Carol King on piano, Russ Kunkel on drums, and Danny Korchmar on guitar. And we reassembled that to do the gig. And then on the original, Carol had just played with James, but when we did and James had invited Carol to do a few songs in front of his show, which would be her first shows as an artist, because she was essentially just a songwriter before that. So that's how that happened. And sorry, I forgot where I was for a minute. What was the question? Where were we headed?
Well, no, that actually segues into my next question. So for those who don't know, how big of a deal was playing at the Troubadour? Like, what was you see it referenced in so many movies. What was the big deal about that place?
It was the cool place. And it was cool in two respects. One, it's where people played to get to a very well-educated and very musical audience, and so we all knew that if you could make it at the Troubadour, be it on Hoot Night, which was Monday nights, or if you could get an actual gig there. James played there, I think it turns out like 3 or 4 times. Certainly once on his own, once with Cooch and Carol, and then once with Cooch and Lee and Russ and Carol, I think. No, sorry, the first time was just Russ, Lee, and Carol, and then we added Cooch. And the big one was the one where, as I say, Sweet Baby James was out. So we knew that the song list was the songs that were on Sweet Baby James and the songs that were going to be on Mudslide Slim that we'd already rehearsed some of. And meanwhile, Carol was doing the songs that she was about to record in Tapestry. And it was the sound check for that gig. When James and I left the stage and left Carol alone on the stage to do her sound check, that she ran through a song she had just finished writing the night before for her sound check. And James and I were sticking around because Carol was very nervous. We wanted to give her moral support. So we were sitting in the balcony of the Troubadour watching, and Carol ran through this song she wrote the night before called You've Got a Friend. That's when we heard it for the very first time. And that's when James and I asked whether there was any possibility she would consider letting James record it, which was kind of crazy because normally if you write something so good, you keep it for yourself. But when James and I heard it that night, we looked at each other and kind of went, wow, shit, what was that?
I know.
And she so graciously allowed us to record it. And that's how it happened, that almost simultaneously, I was in the studio producing the James version of You've Got a Friend at Crystal Sound Studios. And without Carol playing, because we didn't have any piano on that record, it was just Cooch's and James's acoustics. Oh, and I did have one secret weapon, which was that James's girlfriend at the time was in the studio with us, who was Joni Mitchell. So I asked Joni if she would sing all the background parts, which she did. So all those you just call out mine, all that stuff is Joni, which is why that's so cool. But at the same time, Lou Adler was producing Carol's version of You've Got a Friend over at A&M Studios. And they both came out. Of course, the miracle is that everyone came out a winner because James had the huge hit single all over the world. And Carol's version was a key track on Tapestry, which became one of the biggest selling albums ever.
Now, tell us in that era how you came to be connected with Linda Ronstadt.
I don't know the dates, but I was in New York. And somebody said to me, oh, you have to go and see this girl playing at the bitter end. She's amazing. She's, one of the greatest voices you'll ever hear. She's musically brilliant. And they also, did mention that she sang barefoot in these very short shorts and was absurdly hot. And it was all true. I went to see her and every word was correct. But then I met her and discovered she was one of the smartest, most literate, most well-informed, most well-read, most extraordinary women I've ever met in my life. And we became great friends. And and remain so. I'm happy to say one of the first places I shall go as soon as all this nonsense is diminished is to fly up to San Francisco to see Linda. It's hard for her to travel, but she is great. You know, I went with her to the, anyway, so sorry, back to the bitter end. So I saw her at the bitter end, loved her. I didn't start managing her straight away, because I was managing Kate Taylor, and I thought managing two great girl singers would be tricky. But what I did do was help her finish the album she was working on at the time, which was Don't Cry Now. And I produced some of that, helped pull the whole thing together because it got a bit muddled, and finished that. And then the first album we actually worked on together from scratch was Heart Like a Wheel.
There's a great picture of you on the cover of Rolling Stone with Linda and James. I mean, that must have been just some pretty heady days, and to be,
it was very exciting. It was very exciting. They called me up and said, we want to do a big story on, the fact that you produce and manage these two huge acts. And I said, great, and they said, we'd like
there
you
it
to
is
go
on the screen.
Yep. They said, we'd like you to go to New York to do a photo session with Annie Leibovitz. I went, wow, yes, I'm in. So, well, one more thing. We're thinking about making it a cover story, but only if you can take James and Linda with you to the photo session. So, I confess I didn't nag them a bit, because did I want to be on the cover of Rolling Stone? You bet I did. So it was, at the time, as you know, it was the pinnacle of rock and roll achievement. So very graciously, they did come with me to the photo shoot.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was the Peter and Gordon, Chad and Jeremy connection, because I don't know, when Chad and Jeremy started getting back together about 20 years ago, a few years later, I got involved and started going on the road with them, and was their road manager for a while and did a documentary on them. So I was there the first time that you guys performed together. In fact, these are some photos I took of the first. It was amazing that it took like 40 years for Chad and Jeremy and Peter and Gordon to share the stage. That's
a great picture, because thank you for that, because yes, the people were very unclear as to whether there really were two separate duos. I mean, I know it's strange, but the similarities were dauntingly peculiar, because there were only two duos associated with the British invasion, I think.
I think so.
A lot of bands, two duos. And the thing was that both duos were very unlike the rest of the whole invasion. We weren't from Liverpool. We weren't working class. We were from London. We were a bit posh. And in each case, there were these strange similarities. Each duo had the tall, handsome one who sang the low part, and the short one wore glasses but was really clever, who sang the high part. And when you think about it, that's a strange set of circumstances to be mirrored. And I think that picture you just showed, that gig we did, was probably the first time, certainly the first time we'd ever been on stage together, and maybe the final proof that there actually were two different duos, because people would confuse us all the time, because things we did, we were on the Ed Sullivan Show, they weren't. On the other hand, they were on the Patty Duke Show and the Dick Van Dyke Show and all these cool comedy shows that we weren't. And we both, suffered from this, or not suffered, but when it ran into this, where people would go, "Oh, you guys were great on Batman," and eventually Gordon and I would just go, "Oh, thank you." Yeah,
We were at this Folk Alliance thing about 10 years ago, and Jeremy was on a panel with Chad, and he said, if I had a dime for everyone that thanked me for singing "World Without Love," I'd be really rich by now.
Exactly. EMI's royalty rates are considerably less than that.
So now fate has actually brought you together, because with the passing of Gordon and with the retirement or semi-retirement of Chad, you are now doing shows with Jeremy. So tell me what that's like.
Well, it seemed obvious. I mean, it just seemed inevitable, because, the fact that the two of us who were left, with one dead and one retired, were, the high guy and the low and the melody part guy. And we just looked at each other. Plus, Jeremy and I are both actors as well. So we're, Jeremy more professionally than I, but I've done a lot of acting in my time. So we're both kind of stage hams. We both enjoyed being up there. So we looked at each other when this happened and kind of went, oh, okay, it's obvious. You know, we have to go on the road together. We have to do Peter and Jeremy. There's not even any argument about which order the names are in. Because if you think about it, think about this. The weirdest thing is in both cases, the lead guy was second. That's weird. It was Peter and Gordon, lead singer, Chad and Jeremy, lead singer. So somehow we both put the handsome guy who sang the lead second. It was a miracle. So therefore he was clearly going to be and Jeremy. I'm still number one, and I don't let Jeremy forget it. So
does he still do the joke where he says, in England, I'm Jeremy Clyde, the actor, and in America, I'm Ann Jeremy?
Yes, exactly.
Okay, good.
He does.
So listen, I'm going to go back to your acting career for a second because I wanted to mention this book here by Russ Jaguar from the Association, who was on our show last week, and he wanted me to say hi to you. And his wife, Valerie, is the historian for SAG-AFTRA, and she wrote something on Boris Karloff, and she said you wrote a really nice letter and that you were actually in a movie at age 10 or 11 with him. Can you tell us about that experience?
Almost correct. It wasn't a movie, it was a TV show.
TV show.
Boris Karloff moved to England at some point and did a show called Colonel March of Scotland Yard. And he was a detective. And I was in one of them. You know, that was when my child acting career was going very well. And I was working a lot. And I did one episode called The Talking Head, which was about a statue that was giving me instructions to kill somebody. And he was charming. Well, everyone always goes, what was Boris Karloff like? He was charming. See, the thing to remember is I didn't know anything about all the horror movies because they were all X-rated in England. I couldn't see those. I was 11. So I'd never seen him being, you know, the Frankenstein's creature or whatever he did. So I didn't really know who he was, to be honest, but I knew it was a big deal. And he was charming. There was one scene where he had to, with his walking stick, I was about to drink a glass of milk, which he knew to be poisoned. The plot was rather complicated. And he smashed it out of my hand with his stick. And of course, they had a double and a this and the other, but he was worried. But he was charmingly concerned that I wouldn't be scared or whatever. No, I was thrilled. And he was great. Yes, I contributed a letter. There was some book about Boris Karloff or a show or something, and they asked me to write a recollection of I only spent 2 days with him, 3 days shooting the show, but he was very nice to me.
So tell me about what it's like to win a Grammy Award. I mean, you see it on TV, and you see they put the 4 or 5 nominees in little boxes on the screen.
Yeah.
What's really going through your head when you're waiting to be told if you are a winner or not?
Oh, you're going, Jesus, I hope I win. You pretend you're not, and you clap for the winner. I mean, it happened to me just the other day, actually. That the last Grammy I was up for was the Steve Martin, Edie Brickell album I did. It won for it won for Best Bluegrass Song for I forget which song on the album, but anyway, it won for Best Bluegrass Song, and I went, okay, that's good, because that's a Grammy for Steve and Edie. And the next one was, Bluegrass Roots Album of the Year or whatever it was, and I was going, well, obviously, if we won that, we're going to win this one too. So I'm half out of my seat. Best Bluegrass Group Album, and instead it was Rodney Crowell and Emmylou Harris, and so well, let's put it this way. I texted Rodney as he was running down the aisle, and I couldn't read the text here. I don't know what the rules are.
We have no rules. We're on the internet.
I didn't trip him up as he ran down the aisle, but it took all my self-control. I love Rodney and I love Emmylou, and they deserve to win, but I would much prefer that if they lost.
Well, see, I appreciate your honesty, Peter. Because people say it's an honor to be nominated.
No, it is, but it's a much bigger honor to win. And
that's right.
And certainly when I've won Producer of the Year twice, and that there've been some big ones we lost. You've Got a Friend didn't win. Linda didn't win a couple of times when I thought she should, though she's won a lot. But yeah, it's fun, and in the end, it is not that important. But given the choice, do I like winning more than losing? Oddly enough, yes.
Someone just typed in and asked a question a little while ago.
Okay.
What track that you've produced in your career for any artist really stands out as maybe the one you're the most proud of? I know they're probably all like your children.
There's a bunch of them. I confess I do tend to like hits. So I'm proud of You've Got a Friend. I'm very proud of You're No Good. That was a complicated track, and a great deal of credit must go to Andrew Gold, with whom I worked on all the instrumental stuff, and who's a genius, who was a genius. And I don't know. I'd probably pick those two. There's some I've done that are less well known. I did an album with Amanda Marshall. There's a song called Everybody's Got a Story that I think is really good, but it wasn't. It was a hit in Canada, but not a hit anywhere else. So I don't know. I tend not to consider them finished and not let them come out until I'm proud of them. So there's none that I would reject. Show Me Heaven by Maria McKee, for example, which is not particularly well known. It wasn't a hit in America. It was a hit in the UK. Is a good record. She didn't like it. She wasn't happy with what we did together, but I thought it was really good, and it got to #1 in England, but it didn't get to #1 in America.
Well, that works.
I loved working with Cher. The version we did of It's in His Kiss, I'm proud of, and I love her singing. So I love singers who, the minute you hear them sing, you know who it is.
Yes,
you hear like two notes. Linda's one of the best singers in the universe, and I think the best thing I've ever worked with. But you hear one note of Linda, you know who it is. One note of Cher, you know who it is. One note of Natalie Merchant, you know who it is. One note of James, you know who it is. I love that. When somebody says to me, "Oh, will you make a record with me? I can sing anything," I'm instinctively going, put off. I want someone who knows how they sing, who wants to sing their way.
Mm-hmm.
To me, those are the Diana Ross. I mean, first time I was in the studio with Diana Ross, first of all, I was terrified, but and she was great and charming. I knew her socially, but we never worked together, and it was amazing. But the main thing was, she goes out there to sing whatever song it is we're working on. She walks up to the mic. You're sitting in the control room, and she sings. And you go, "Holy shit! She sounds just like Diana Ross. It's amazing." And you're suddenly remembering all those Supremes records and how great the vocals were. And there she is, still sounding great and still phrasing amazingly. And Diana, every take is different. She tries out new phrasing, as if she's a genius. So, I mean, I've been so lucky in working with so many good singers.
You brought up Natalie Merchant. So was it Our Time in Eden? Was that the 10,000 Maniacs album you produced?
No, I did the first two sort of big hit ones, the In My Tribe, and Blind Man's Zoo.
And what was that? Were they new and undiscovered at that time when you did their first record? Obviously,
they were new. They were not undiscovered, but they were not successful. They were new indie, cool. They'd had 2 indie albums, I think, and then this was their first Electro Asylum big label album, and I got to produce that, which was an honor. And those 2 albums each did a couple of million. They were very big.
Yeah. 2 more questions for you, because you've given us a lot of time tonight. One of them is since the Sirius XM explosion and the Beatles channel and your show, what's been, the difference in even attendance at your concerts and things? Has it really made a difference in your career having this show on Sirius XM? Is it that big of a deal?
It's made a difference. It's not the be all and end all, but no question about it. Yes, it clearly reestablishes. I get the opportunity to tell some stories. I get to play music I love. It helps to promote things, of course. If you're lucky enough to have a radio show that people listen to, and you can go, "I shall be playing at X on Thursday, please come, then clearly that's a plus, because people might decide to come if we ever get an opportunity to do a gig again. As long as we live, we don't
Oh,
know.
I know. Well, hopefully it returns to normal soon. So
I mean,
listen,
I was supposed to be doing gigs. I'm supposed to be on a cruise right now, and can you imagine? So it's all very much up in the air.
you were talking earlier, and this is kind of what I wanted to end on is, about how people write these books. And I've seen the books where it's like, this is every song in the Beatles recorded in the studios. And I mean, it's cool and all, but tell me what were they like as people? I mean, they were this huge group that every single, billions of people know who they are, but you didn't even, you did more than become a fly on the wall. I mean, we would all just want to be a fly on the wall. You were friends with these guys and still are.
I was friends, but I don't ever want to claim that we were all best friends, or that, I mean, I knew Paul the best, of course, because we were living next to each other, but we were both working, and, I was friends with all of them. I would never claim to be like their closest friend or the fifth Beatle or any of that nonsense. I'm incredibly reluctant to look like one of the people going, oh, I said to Paul and I told John and this, that, and the other. But they were musically brilliant and still are. The cliches, like all cliches, are not without a basis in fact. I mean, George was the quiet one. Ringo was the funny one. Paul was and is the most charming, socially adept, remembering your name and being nice to everyone one. And John was the one capable of being acerbic and even unpleasant, but also capable of being incredibly perceptive and brilliant and remarkable and, an extraordinary person. So I don't have any, can I throw any magic light on what they were really like? No. Am I delighted to have known them? Am I honored to have spent some time with them? Am I thrilled to have the honor of being part of their story, even to a very minor extent, that we worked together when I was head of A&R for the label and they were my bosses, and we would have meetings, and, I would try to keep things on an even keel and stuff during those meetings. So yes, they were one of those cases where, let's put it this way. Take a band like the Spice Girls, and I was a big Spice Girls fan. Somebody consciously assembled, Posh Spice, Sporty, whatever it was, Sporty Spice, Baby Spice, all that. They put it together, In the Beatles case, that happened by fate. You got the band of these incredible musicians, these brilliant players, and you got, the cute one, the funny one, the acerbic one, everything fit together perfectly. And as brilliant as they each of them are and were on their own, there is something magical about what happened. It was the perfect storm. It was the right time, the right place, the right people, the right manager, the right producer. Everything coalesced to create a body of work which we will be looking back on, or not we, but other people will be looking back on 100 years from now, the way we look at Mozart or Bach. We will go, that was the definitive band of the era. That's as good as pop music ever got in that period of time. And we will thank fate, or whatever your particular faith is. Mine is zero. We will thank fate for the fact that it happened and that we got to even be there and even listen to their music, which people will still be listening to 1,000 years from now, in my view.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I want everyone to go out and get your book, The Beatles from A to Z, because it's great. And
I do too. That's a good plan. I endorse that plan.
And I want them all to listen to you on Sirius XM and to go see you when next time you're at Ram's Head or wherever it is.
I hope so. Yes, though I can't wait for gigs to get going. I think it's going to be next year, to be honest. Do I think there's going to be any gigs this year? I don't. But any real gigs. But next year, I will be working as much as they will let me. And I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Peter. Have a good night. My pleasure. Thank you very much. And thanks to everyone who's been sending all these texts. I wish I could have answered them. I keep seeing all these Amy's sending me hearts right now. Thank you very much. And Debbie says, yeah, okay, all right, before you go, put a couple of them up then so he can read a few of them. Debbie Martin. It's fabulous. Barbara. They're all women. This is wonderful. I love this. Brenda. Pat. Hi, Pat. Jody. Oh, a guy. Brian. Thank you, Peter. Okay, Brian.
Hey, thanks for shouting out to them. All right. Thank you so much, Peter. We'll see you next time.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
See ya. Bye. So can you say like that was just the coolest thing, man, to like actually have Peter Asher on the Caswell Cooke Show? So do me a favor. You guys have all enjoyed this tonight. We've had some really cool guests on this show over the past few weeks, few months, few years. So if you go to the Caswell Cooke Show on Facebook, if you could just give me a like for that page. And if you could go to Caswell Cooke Show on YouTube, you'll be able to see these great interviews. And there's some great replays you can watch from last week. We had Gary Puckett from Gary Puckett and the Union Gap. We had Susan Cowsill. We had Tom Wopat from the Dukes of Hazzard. Terry Sylvester from the Hollies. The list goes on of some great guests. So please check out the Caswell Cooke Show on any of your social media streams. I want to thank my producer, Ben Barber, for doing an awesome job tonight, bringing in all that footage and stuff. And I want to thank Keith Putney for setting the interview up. He's a great agent who works with a lot of artists and brings us a lot of great artists. And that's all the time we have tonight. I did want to say thank you again to everyone watching on the Peter and Gordon and the Peter Asher pages. And we're going to end with a song that's not as well known, but it's from, I think, Hullabaloo. It's great. You can totally see where Mike Myers got the Austin Powers thing. So we're going to end now with a Peter and Gordon video. And I'm going to say thank you, everyone, for watching. Good night, everybody. And good night, Mom. See you later.
You said what we did from the start was no good. And you tried to stop everything that you could. Now you're like a meadow that needs raining on. You're looking for tears, but your tears have all gone. You're living with one man and wanting one more. You made up your mind when your heart wasn't sure. Now you're like a meadow that can't grow no corn. You told me to leave, but you cried as I've gone. You climb up your staircase and count every step, but you know you're trying so hard to forget. You look in the mirror and comb your fair hair. You look at his picture and see my face there. There were two ways that I had to choose. You knew all along if I won, you would lose. You're like a meadow that can't grow no corn. You told me to leave, but you cried 'cause I've gone. Yes, you're like a meadow that needs raining on. You're looking for tears, but your tears have all gone.